Buongiorno ragazzi and welcome to our final review video. The topics that do not appear in this review will not be covered in the final, okay? So you will notice quickly that there is a lot that I have decided to leave out of the final. Again, only the topics that we will cover in this review will be in the final. So the first thing that this video will be useful for will be obviously selecting what you're actually going to need to study. So the first topic we're going to review is our first vocab list. Okay? Cos'è? Of course, the question cos'è, I hope you remember means what is it, right? Cos'è un professore? And of course, professore is masculine, right? This is a male professor, right? Cos'è una professoressa? This is the feminine version, right? So professore is masculine, professoressa is feminine. You will probably also have noticed that besides the word, the vocab word from our initial list, I'm also giving you the indefinite article, right? So before we continue reviewing the vocab, I'm going to go quickly through the rules for the indefinite article in Italian. We have 4 options for it. Uno, un, una, or un with the apostrophe. And all of those are the equivalent of a or an, right? So, un professore would mean a male professor. Una professoressa would mean a female professor, right? Okay, so how do we decide which of these 4 we need for a specific word? Well, first we look at the gender of the word, right? So here's our table. We have 2 big columns, right? One of them says maschile on the left for masculine, and the other says femminile on the right for feminine. So first we look at the gender of the word. If the gender is masculine, we look at the left of this table. So we have 2 options, uno or un without the apostrophe, right? So when do we use uno? As you can see in this table, we use it when the word begins either with Z or with S followed by another consonant or GN. So I'm giving you 3 examples here. Uno zaino begins with Z. Uno studente begins with S followed by a T. Uno gnocco begins with GN. So in all these cases, you use uno. And in all other cases, you use un libro, un professore, un orologio, right? Now, if the word is feminine, we look at the right side of the table, femminile, and we have 2 options for the feminine as well. We have un with the apostrophe and una. And how do we decide which one to use? Well, if the word begins with a vowel, meaning A, E, I, O, or U, in that case, we use un with the apostrophe, like un'aula or un'università. And in all other cases, we use una. So these are the rules for the indefinite article. So in the exam, the first section is going to be 5 questions in which you will see images directly extracted from this vocab list, from this video in particular, and you will have to answer with the correct vocabulary word and also with the correct indefinite article. So if the image of the male professor appears in the exam, your answer would be un professore. If the image of the female professor appears, your answer would be una professoressa. Okay, that's our first section. 5 questions, 5 images. You need to answer with the right vocab word and with the correct indefinite article. So this said, let's keep on reviewing the vocab. Cos'è una lavagna? That means both blackboard and whiteboard. Of course, lavagna is feminine. Cos'è una porta? A door. Notice this is feminine and does not begin with a vowel, so I say una, right? Cos'è una finestra? That's a window, again, does not begin with a vowel, and it is feminine, so our article is una. Cos'è un orologio? Notice that this one is masculine, right? So even though it begins with a vowel, my article is un without the apostrophe because the word is masculine, and of course, it means clock. Cos'è uno scaffale? A shelf, right? Notice that scaffale begins with an S followed by a C, so S plus another consonant, and notice that it is masculine, so we say uno scaffale. Cos'è uno studente? Again, studente is masculine and begins with ST, so uno, that's a male student. Cos'è una studentessa? Female student. Cos'è una scrivania? That's a desk. Cos'è una sedia? That is a chair. Cos'è un tavolo? That is a table. Here you could also answer una tavola, although tavola tends to be more like a dinner table, but that's fine, it also means table. Cos'è un libro? A book, of course. E questo cos'è? This is a book, but a different type of book, right? Un dizionario. Cos'è uno zaino? Notice it begins with Z and is masculine, so it's uno zaino, a backpack. Questo cos'è un quaderno? A notebook. Questo cos'è una calcolatrice? That's a calculator. Questo cos'è un computer? Computer, yes, you just pronounce computer like, you know, with Italian sounds, but it's the same word. It's an anglicism. Cos'è una penna? A pen. Cos'è una matita? A pencil. Cos'è un pennarello? That's a marker, right? So again, our first section of the final will be 5 questions, 5 images from this list. You will need to answer with the correct vocab word and the correct indefinite article. The next topic for the final is the colors, right? These are the colors we studied, right? I'm not going to pronounce them again. If you have doubts about the pronunciation, you can go back to the video in which I talk about the colors for the first time, right? What I am going to remind you of is that colors are adjectives, which means that they need to have the same gender as the thing that they're describing, right? If what they're describing is masculine, we need to use a masculine form of the adjective. If the thing described is feminine, we need to use a feminine form of the adjective, right? And also, adjectives need to change to the plural if what they're describing is plural, right? So, the first row of adjectives here, bianco, nero, rosso, giallo, azzurro, and grigio, the ones that are listed as colori in O, in the feminine, they change to an A, right? So, for example, if I have a white notebook, notebook is cuaderno and is masculine, so I would say cuaderno bianco. But if I have a white board, lavagna is feminine, so I would say lavagna bianca. right? Each of these has a feminine form that ends in A. Bianco has bianca, nero has nera, rosso has rossa, giallo has gialla, azzurro has azzurra, grigio has grigia. Right? The next row, marrone, arancione, and verde, they do not have a feminine form. Okay? Quaderno marrone, lavagna marrone. Quaderno verde, lavagna verde. They do not change when the thing described is feminine. Okay? And then the last three also do not change, right? They are invariable, they never change. That is how these adjectives change in terms of their gender. Now, what about the plural? For the colors in the first row, if the singular ended in O, it changes to an I, right? So bianco would change to bianchi, nero would change to neri, rosso to rossi, and so on and so forth. But if it was ending in A, bianca would change to bianche, nero would change to nere. So we're just following the rules, if you think about it. The rules of the plural, right? Let's say that O goes to I, A goes to E. So a few examples. We had said quaderno bianco, right? White notebook. I'm using the masculine because quaderno is masculine. If I want to say white notebooks, I would say quaderni, right? O goes to I. Bianchi, O goes to I. How about lavagna bianca? In the plural, it would be lavagne bianche, right? A goes to E. It's not lavagna bianca, it's lavagne bianche, right? The colors in the second row also follow the rule of the plural, right? So in the plural, they change to I. Marrone becomes marroni, arancione becomes arancioni, verde becomes verdi. Quaderno verde, quaderni verdi. Lavagna verde, lavagne verdi, right? And how about those in the last row? Well, I said they never change, so they don't change in the plural either, right? Quaderno rosa, quaderni rosa. Lavagna blu, lavagne blu. These last three never change. Okay? So, how are the colors going to appear in the final? There are going to be two sections that have to do with the colors. The first one is quite easy. There's going to be 5 boxes with a color, one of these, but no word. And you'll have to answer with the correct name. Right? So that's just vocab. And then, I hope you remember the exercises we did with the valigia, right? With the suitcase, in which we had a number of objects in a suitcase, and we needed to say what we had in a suitcase, how many there were, and what color they had, right? So we would answer with sentences like ci sono 3 matite grigie nella valigia, right? There are 3 gray pencils in the suitcase. I'm going to give you 2 images like that, in which you will all, of course, have to use c'è ci sono. There are. You will have to use the numbers, but nothing too difficult, from 1 to 9. You will have to use the vocab that we just studied, right? And you will have to use the colors. Right? So again, 5 boxes with colors, which you will have to identify with the name of the color inside, and then 2 exercises with the suitcase, in which you will have to say what we have in the suitcase. Okay? Now, everything else that will appear in the final has to do with verbs. I mentioned repeatedly in class and in my videos that I'm very big on verbs for Italian 101. I believe that they're the most important part to start learning for someone who is beginning. their journey in the Italian language. And in any language, I would say, verbs almost always are the most important kind of word. So there's going to be a lot about verbs in this final. The first thing that there's going to be is the irregular verbs we studied. So I'm going to start by reminding you that in very general terms, we have two types of verbs in the Italian language. We have the irregular ones, which are the ones that do not follow a pattern, and therefore we have to memorize how they are conjugated. And then we have the regulars, which do follow a pattern, right? So we do not memorize, we only learn how to apply that pattern. In terms of irregular verbs, we only studied two. In fact, we studied 5 if we include the modals, but we're not going to have the modals in the final. So there's going to be only 2 irregular verbs in our final. One of them is essere, which means to be, and goes, of course, like this. Io sono, tu sei, lui, lei è, noi siamo. Voi siete, loro sono. And then there's avere, which goes, io ho, tu hai, lui ha. Noi abbiamo, voi avete, loro hanno. Right? Remember, of course, that these are conjugation tables, and on the column on the left, you have the personal pronouns, right? The ones that mean I, you, he, she, we, you guys, they. So that gives us basically a list of all possible subjects. And then on the right, we have the correct form of the verb for each of those, right? So conjugating means changing the verb so that it matches the subject, so that it matches whoever is doing the action. These two do not follow a pattern, so we said you had to memorize them. I really hope that by this point you have memorized them, but if you have not, you have until the day of the final to do so. These verbs are going to also appear in 2 forms. First, we're going to have 5 questions, in which I'm going to give you a question of the form, let's say, avere per io. What I want there is for you to give me the correct conjugation of avere for io, right? The answer, of course, if you look at the table of avere, would be O with an H, right? H-O. That would be our answer. These are going to be multiple choice, right? So I'm going to give you 4 possible choices, and of those 4, you will have to choose the one that is correct, right? 5 of those, and then 5 sentence questions. Of these, we did a number during the semester. These are the types of questions in which I give you a sentence with a verb between brackets. And you have to take that verb and conjugate it depending on who the subject of the action is, right? A very simple example. Let's say that I give you a question that says io, and then essere between brackets, a blank, and then professore, right? So io means I. Of course, what I want to say is I am a professor, right? So you would need to fill in that blank, or in this case, type in your answer, right? You would need to type in the correct conjugation of essere for that sentence. So who's the subject there? It's io, so you would go io sono professore, right? 5 of those questions. Again, 5 multiple choice questions in which you need to choose the correct conjugation for a subject, and then 5 sentence questions in which you need to conjugate correctly the verb between brackets. That is all that we have about these 2 irregular verbs in the final. Now, we also studied the regular verbs, right? We said that regular verbs in Italian are classified according to the ending of their infinitive, right? So we have 3 big groups, right? We have the are, the ere, and the ire verbs, right? And we studied a 3-step process for conjugating regular verbs. I'm going to start by showing you an are verb, like cantare. First step is, of course, we get rid of the are of the ending of the infinitive. And I hope you remember that what we're left with after we get rid of that ending is called the stem of the verb. And then we take our little trusted table of are endings, right? And we basically insert them after the stem, right, in their order. And behold, that way we get our conjugation table. So it goes io canto, tu canti, lui, lei canta, noi cantiamo, voi cantate, loro cantano. Now, notice that, of course, these are the are endings, this little table in yellow on the left, right? So what this means is, of course, that for each of our groups of regular verbs, we have a set of endings. So let's look at another example. Let's look at a verb like correre, which is an ere verb. The procedure is, of course, the same. We get rid of the ending of the infinitive, in this case, ere. Cor would be our stem, and then we add the ere endings because this is an ere verb. So the conjugation of corre would go io corro, tu corri, lui, lei corre, noi corriamo, voi correte, loro corrono, right? I hope you remember, and if you do not, I entreat you to go and find the video in which I gave you a review of the conjugation of regular verbs. I hope you remember that the tables of endings, if you compare the are and the ere endings, are actually similar. There are only 3 changes, right? The lui, lei ending changes from an a in are verbs to an e in ere verbs. The voi ending, the second to last, changes from an ate to an ete. And the loro ending, the last one, changes from an ano to an ono, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, again, I entreat you to go back to that video, and there's also a downloadable file with a little table that compares the 3 sets of endings. So I strongly recommend that you go to that material and use it for studying. This was our ere verb. Let's look at a regular ire verb, like dormire. Let's get rid of the ending as usual. So in order to obtain the stem, in this case our stem is dorm, and then we add, of course, the ire endings because this is an ire verb. So the conjugation goes io dormo, tu dormi, lui, lei dorme, noi dormiamo, voi dormite, loro dormono. If you compare this table with the previous one, namely the ire endings with the ere endings, you will see that only one of them changes, namely the voi ending. It is ete, E-T-E, ete, for ere verbs. It is ite, I-T-E, for ire verbs. Everything else is the same if you compare the ere and ire tables. Right? Okay, so we have done are verbs, ere verbs, and ire verbs, but we also have a little subset of ire verbs which are slightly different, right? Those are the isc verbs, like capire. The procedure is basically the same. We get rid of the ending, we obtain the stem. Sorry, there's a typo here. The stem is, of course, not dorm, but cap, right? And then we add the ire endings, but there's an important difference. Look at the conjugation table of capire here. It goes io capisco, tu capisci, lui capisce, noi capiamo, voi capite, loro capiscono. So what happened here? Well, this is an isc verb, right? Which means that I have to insert isc, I-S-C, in between the stem and the ending in 4 of the 6 conjugations, right? Basically everywhere except for noi and voi. But if you look at the endings, right, you will see that there are normal ire endings. So you only have to remember about the isc everywhere except for noi and voi. Now, how do you know that a verb is an isc verb? For the purposes of our Italian 101, these are the isc verbs we're using: capire, diminuire, finire, fornire, preferire, pulire, punire, restituire, and spedire. So if it is in this list for the purposes of 101, it is an isc verb. If it is not, it is a normal ire verb. Okay? That is, of course, very important for the final, so take this table into account. So how are regular verbs going to appear in the final? We are going to have a set of 5 questions in which I will give you a verb and a subject. For example, amare per loro, right? So you have to take that regular verb, right? Get rid of the are and add the correct ending for loro. The correct answer would be amano, right? Ano is the ending for loro for are verb. 5 of those. And then 5 sentence questions with a verb between brackets, and you have to conjugate it according to the subject. So you have to ask yourself who is doing the action and what form of the verb do I need for that subject. Okay? Now that is it with regular verbs, right? There's one more thing, one more big topic that is going to appear in the final. That's the last one, and it's passato prossimo. Okay? So we said that passato prossimo is the conjugation form we use to talk about the past, right? And passato prossimo has 2 parts, right? This is very important to remember, right? The first one is the verb avere, okay? So memorize avere, it's very important. And if you don't give me the verb avere, it's not real passato prossimo. And then there's a second part, which is known as the participio passato or the past participle. This one's very easy to find. Depends on what type of verb it is. For are verbs, like amare, just like when conjugating them, you get rid of that ending and you insert something else. You insert ato in this case. So the past participle of amare is amato. The past participle of mangiare is mangiato. Get rid of are, insert ato. The past participle of parlare is parlato. And so on and so forth. How about ere verbs? Well, same thing. You get rid of the ere, but you insert uto. So the past participle of avere is avuto, of cadere is caduto, of perdere it's perduto. Okay? How about ire verbs? Same thing, get rid of the ending, but instead of ato or uto, you insert ito. So the past participle of dormire is dormito, the past participle of capire is capito, the past participle of preferire is preferito, and so on and so forth. Not all past participles follow these rules, but for the purposes of 101, all of our verbs are going to follow those rules, okay? And the vast majority of verbs in Italian do follow this rule. So, but wait a minute, because I said that passato prossimo has 2 parts, right? And this is only one. So, what does the actual conjugation of a verb in passato prossimo look like? Let's look at capire, for example. Here you have it. You will see that in this conjugation table, unlike the ones we had done before, now we have 3 columns. The first one on the left is our trusty set of personal pronouns, right? Io, tu, lui, lei, noi, voi, and loro. But the middle is the verb avere in the conjugation we learned, right? So o goes with io, I goes with tu, a goes with lui, lei, and so on and so forth. And then the final column is the past participle that we just learned to obtain, right? Now, what does this mean? This is the past, right? So if you say io ho capito, that means I understood, right? It means that it happened in the past. If you say voi avete capito, it means you guys have understood, or you guys understood, okay? Lui ha capito, he understood. Lei ha capito, she understood. Noi abbiamo capito, we understood, right? How about an ere verb? Here you have avere. Io ho avuto, tu hai avuto, lui, lei ha avuto, noi abbiamo avuto, voi avete avuto, loro hanno avuto. And how about an are verb, like amare? Same thing. Io ho amato, tu hai amato, lui ha amato, noi abbiamo amato, voi avete amato, loro hanno amato. One final observation about passato prossimo. It is very, very common to get rid of one of these elements, but not the second or the third. You need the second, you need the third. The one you tend to get rid of is the first one. Instead of saying io ho capito, you would say ho capito, and that's it. Right? We have discussed this a couple times in the past, right? In Italian, since verbs change so much depending on the subject, it can sound redundant to say the subject because the verb itself already contains the information about who is doing the action, right? So you can totally get rid of that. Instead of saying noi abbiamo amato, you say abbiamo amato and basta, and that's it. Okay? So in what manner is the passato prossimo going to appear in the final? It's very similar to what we have seen before. We have a set of 5 multiple choice questions in which I tell you amare passato prossimo per loro, and you have to answer hanno amato, right? Conjugate correctly the verb for the subject I give you, and then a final set of 5 sentence questions with verbs between brackets. And the only difference between this one and the ones that will come before will be, of course, that for this last one you will have to conjugate the verbs in passato prossimo, namely you will have to give me 2 words, right? A form of the verb avere and then a past participle. And that's it. All other topics that we studied were very important, but for the sake of helping you and making this final a little more palatable, I decided to get rid of those. If you add the questions I just gave you, it adds up to 50 questions. Each of those is worth 2 points for a total of 100 points. Now, finally, in Italian, curiously, it is considered sort of bad luck to tell someone to have good luck. So you rarely say buona fortuna, which would be what good luck is, right? Instead of that, they say something different. A little bit like, in English when you say break a leg, and of course you don't mean that you want the person to break a leg. You mean that you want them to have good luck. So what they say is in bocca al lupo. In bocca al lupo, which means into the mouth of the wolf. So, in bocca al lupo per l'esame, ragazzi. I know you will do very well. Grazie. Ciao ciao.